Salutations! Thank you for lending an ear to The Voice of the Times for Thursday, January 27, 2022, brought to you by Wilkin Depot, the country's leading home improvement and construction supplies retailer. Shop conveniently 24/7 with the Wilkin online store. Just go to shop.wilkin.com.ph. For today's editorial, Planning for a Post-Vaccination World. We would like to pose a question to the health and policy experts of the Philippines, whether they are in government or not. Once the country's vaccination campaign is completed, what comes next? The current theme of the government's response to the pandemic, to be fair, this seems to be the theme for much of the world, except in countries such as China that still maintain an aggressive zero-COVID policy, is that once everyone is vaccinated, that is, has received their initial 1 or 2 shot vaccination and the appropriate booster, COVID-19 will cease to be a general concern. It will still exist, of course, hence the endemic characterization, but will only be a problem for those whose circumstances make them particularly vulnerable, in much the same way that influenza can be a serious risk, but for a relatively small number of people. For the rest of us, provided we've had our shots and observed some generally prudent hygiene practices, we can otherwise go about our business in normal fashion. The evidence that this is the right path, it is implied, is that the Omicron variant is mild despite the speed with which it spreads. Most people who are infected do not become so seriously ill that they require hospitalization, or at least, the number is far fewer than with the deadlier Delta variant, and fewer people die from the Omicron infection. Based on what is emerging in medical research, however, most of this perspective on the pandemic appears to be dangerously fallacious. First, the vaccines do not appear to be the magic bullet current rhetoric still assumes them to be. It is remarkable that they have worked as well as they have, given that they were developed for the first generation of the SARS-CoV-2 virus more than a year ago. But there is clear confirmation that their efficacy declines over time. A large-scale continuous vaccination campaign that requires everyone to get a new booster shot every 3 to 6 months would be required with the vaccines that are available now, and that does not seem to be a reasonable strategy. Second, while Omicron is described as being half as lethal as Delta, Delta was twice as lethal as the original Alpha variant of the coronavirus. Even a mild case of infection with Omicron puts one out of action for 5 to 7 days, and possibly longer. While the presence of Omicron might not put such a strain on the health system, allowing it to go largely unchecked would be extremely disruptive in other ways as people miss work and school. The downturn in business and consumer activity over the past couple of weeks is generally believed to not be the result of restrictions on unvaccinated people, but evidence that a far larger number of people than has been reported were actually sick with COVID-19, or were following advice and isolating themselves due to possible exposure. There are also the potential long-term effects of COVID-19, which researchers are only now beginning to understand. Many people who have contracted COVID-19 may experience health problems for years to come. While more research is needed to try to determine what those effects may be and how many people may be affected, it is a reasonable certainty that whatever problems that are discovered will only be worse if the current focus strays from preventing transmission of COVID-19 in the first place. The vaccines are still an obviously critical tool against COVID-19, and the government should be credited with steadily improving its response in this regard. But it is becoming painfully obvious that vaccination is the first rather than last step in an effective strategy to permanently end the pandemic. So again we ask, what comes next? And that's the editorial for Thursday, January 27, 2022. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to its digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and listen to The Voice of the Times.